Hello everybody and welcome to another video, and today I'm going to talk to you guys about how to diagnose your car's faulty AC system, to determine what's wrong with it and to figure out if it's a fix that you want to make yourself or if it's something you want a professional to handle. It's currently April here in Texas. The days are getting a little bit warmer, and unfortunately my Sentra's AC system is no longer working. So I'm going to walk you guys through the steps of how I diagnose my car's AC system to be able to figure out what's wrong with it. Now understand guys that in this video I'm not going to be talking too much about how to fix the AC system. We're just going to be talking about the diagnosis steps. I'm going to have a later video where I actually fix what's wrong with my car. So before we begin, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about how an AC system works in most vehicles. You see, it consists of 5 main components. The first one is your car's AC compressor. This is essentially a pump that's driven by the accessory belt on the car and allows it to compress the gaseous freon that's in your vehicle. Doing this ends up heating it up, however, so it passes through something called a condenser. A condenser sits in front or behind of your radiator, and it chills this freon down, and in this process makes it form a liquid. This liquid then passes through into something called a dryer. A dryer is essentially just a container where most of your freon is going to sit. It contains filters and things to take out debris, as well as desiccant to take out some of the moisture. After that, it passes from the dryer into your expansion valve or your orifice tube, whatever your car happens to have, and doing this ends up decompressing the freon. The pressure drops and it ends up chilling down quite a lot. It gets really, really cold. Then this cold freon passes through something called your evaporator. Your evaporator is just a snaking tube that also acts a little bit like a radiator. A blower fan is going to blow air past this evaporator, and it ends up chilling the air down, taking the cold away from the freon, and it ends up passing cold air into the cabin. This warms up the freon and it turns it into a gas state again, and this passes back into your compressor. This is all a closed system, it's all completely pressurized, and understanding how each of these components work is going to allow us to try and figure out what's wrong with the car. Alright, so now that we know all of the basic components that are in a car's AC system, you're going to want to try and locate these on your vehicle so you can begin diagnosing what's wrong with it. You can start off by trying to find your car's AC compressor. In order to do this, locate where your serpentine belt is. That's that accessory belt that's going to be located either on the front of the vehicle or on the side. For my 2011 Sentra, this is located on the side of the car. And then you should be able to follow this belt around until you stumble across the compressor. The compressor is going to be a pump. It's going to have 2 hoses attached to it, and it's also going to have a pulley with a little clutch plate that's going to look kind of like that. That's going to be sitting on the front of it. That clutch plate is what actually engages and disengages your compressor. What can also help is if you pull up a diagram showing your car's serpentine belt, it'll allow you to figure out where exactly that compressor is located. Now, if you look at the 2 hoses on the back, oftentimes they're going to be 2 different sizes, which can kind of help determine which side is which. The thinner hose is going to be your high pressure side, and the larger hose is going to be your low pressure side. Now if we locate the 2 hoses that are attached to the compressor, we should be able to follow one of them over to the front of the vehicle where the condenser is located. This condenser is going to be either in front or behind your radiator. You can see it here on my vehicle with the hose being attached to it. The freon is going to flow through this condenser, changing from a gas to a liquid. It's going to pass into the dryer, which on my vehicle is actually located on the other side and is covered by the grill so you can't see it. You may be able to see your condenser close to where the hose actually enters. And then this freon is going to pass through the condenser and head out of a second hose which is attached to it. And this second hose for me leads up to a hard line. Now you can see 2 AC hard lines running right next to each other here. One of them is the high pressure side, which is coming from the condenser. The other is the low pressure side, which is coming back from the evaporator. The low pressure side is typically going to be the hose that's a little bit larger, while the high pressure side is going to be your thinner hose. And you'll notice on these 2 hard lines, there's going to be 2 taps. These are locations where we can actually check the pressure of the AC system, which is going to be really important for us later. So you're going to want to identify where these taps are located on your car. If we continue following these hard lines, it's going to lead into the firewall. On most Nissans and a lot of modern vehicles today, your expansion valve is going to be located here inside this segment of firewall. The expansion valve, as we mentioned earlier, is what's going to actually depressurize your freon, and it's going to cool it down. And then within the dash itself, it's going to pass through the evaporator, which is going to provide you the cool air that's going to pass through your AC units. And then again, that freon passes through, back through the low pressure side hard line that we identified earlier, and then back into your compressor. Now, you don't necessarily need to know where all these components are. As long as you know where your low side tap is and you can see your clutch plate on the front of the compressor wheel, then you should be good to go. These are going to be the main tools you're going to use to diagnose the problem. You'll also want access to the fuse box just in case we need to check a couple of fuses. Alright, so now we can actually get to determining what's wrong with the vehicle, and we want to start by making sure that we're getting proper airflow inside the cabin. So go ahead and turn your car on, and then set your fan speed to high. You should be getting a nice bit of airflow through your vents. If it feels like the air is not blowing as fast as it did when the car was new, it's quite possible that your air filter may be clogged, and this can partly also be leading to the air coming out of your vents being a little less cold. So you may want to double check your car's in-cabin filter just to make sure that it's not clogged with anything that's obstructing the airflow. Replacing the vehicle's in-cabin filter or cleaning it out should fix the airflow issue. However, if you're still getting obstructed airflow and it doesn't seem to be flowing quite right, then it's quite possible that you have something else clogging the system. Either something has been entangled in your evaporator, or there's something else sitting within the car's AC vents, and you're going to need to inspect it further to try and figure out what's in there. It's also quite possible that your blower motor may be going out, so that's something else you may want to consider looking at as well. Now, if you're getting absolutely no airflow through it at all, it probably means that the fuse to the blower has gone bad or the blower itself has died. You may want to check your car's secondary fuse box, which often sits inside the cabin. You'll want to look on the back of the door. There's typically a label there that kind of shows where all the fuses are, and double check the fuse for your blower just to make sure that the blower hasn't gone out and that you're still getting a proper amount of airflow through the car. Most of you, however, are probably not experiencing issues with the airflow coming out of the vents, and it's more so related to the temperature itself. So you'll want to go ahead and set your car's temperature to max cold, and then the next step is going to depend heavily on whether or not the AC coming out of your car is cool but not quite cold like it used to be when it was new, or if the air coming out is not cool at all and it's just completely warm. If you're getting completely warm air through the vents, then the first thing you're going to want to check is your car's clutch that sits on the compressor wheel. You'll want to see that it's engaging properly. Here is a close-up of the pulley on the Sentra with the belt driving over it, and the clutch itself is here off to the left side. And you can see that this clutch plate is not actually butting up against the pulley, so it's not engaging the compressor at all, so the compressor is not being driven. There's a couple of reasons why this might happen. The first and easiest thing you can do is check your car's main fuse box and verify that the fuse for the AC compressor hasn't blown. Again, on the back of the lid you should see a diagram which shows where each of these fuses are located. You can see mine here. And this is where the actual fuse is for my AC compressor on the Sentra. I pulled this fuse out, and here is what a normal intact fuse should look like. We can see that this metal trace is completely connected with no breaks in it. A bad fuse which is blown may look something like this. So, you want to inspect the fuse and make sure that it's not blown. If it is, you can go ahead and replace the fuse, but be warned, if the fuse ends up blowing again shortly after, it probably means that you have a short somewhere, or it's possible that your compressor had an electrical failure, so you're going to want to look out for that. If the fuse blows again, then you're going to want to do an inspection of your wiring and make sure that nothing is shorted. Now, if your fuse is intact, the next thing we need to do is we need to check to see if voltage is actually getting to the clutch that sits on the compressor. So, in order to do this, you'll want to unplug the socket that leads to your compressor wheel, and then you're going to want to check the voltage on the side of the wiring harness that leads back to the fuse box. Don't check the side that's leading to your compressor because nothing's going to be driving it. If you don't already have one, you'll want to invest in a multimeter. You can buy these really cheap online for a few bucks. They come in handy for a lot of different projects. So with the car turned off, I was able to put a couple of really thin wires into the pins on the socket, and I was able to connect them up to the multimeter, and with the car off it reads 0 volts, and that's kind of what we expect to see. Now with the car on and the AC running at max, I can see a full 14 volts coming out of my socket. This is what you expect to see because your alternator is going to be driving it at 14 volts. Because it's trying to send power over to the clutch wheel, that means that the clutch wheel itself has gone bad. If you're actually seeing voltage from that socket, but your clutch wheel wasn't being driven like we saw earlier, it means that the clutch pack has gone bad, and that's why I've ended up ordering a replacement, because this is what had gone wrong on my car. And that makes sense because my AC was completely dead, the compressor wheel wasn't being driven at all, and it had failed over the course of about a week or two as the clutch material, I suspect, was slowly being worn out. So that's what went wrong with my car. Now, if you don't have access to a multimeter, you can always go and just buy a replacement clutch and electromagnet. They all come usually as a set, and you can buy them for about 40 to 50 bucks online. and you can plug a new one into your car and check to see if the electromagnet actually engages properly like it does here. This just verifies that it was actually getting voltage through that socket. If no voltage is being sent over to your AC compressor, if your multimeter is reading 0, more than likely what that means is that your low pressure switch, which is essentially a sensor that sits on the low pressure side of your AC system, is not getting tripped because you're really low on freon. So what you'll end up doing is you're going to fill it up with freon, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. And if that doesn't fix the problem, then more than likely what's wrong is either a piece of control circuitry has gone bad or there's a break in a wire, in which case it's more than likely best to talk to a professional that knows the car's AC system a bit better and have them take a look at it to try and figure out what's wrong with the electrical system. That was all assuming that your clutch wasn't engaging properly. However, if your clutch is engaging, you can see it spinning with the pulley, and you're still getting nothing but warm air through your vents, then it most likely means one of two things. It either means that your compressor has died out completely, or you may be completely out of freon, and we're going to check this here in just a moment. If your car is running cool air through the vents, if it's not quite warm, but it's not as cold as it used to be, the first thing you can check is make sure that there's nothing obstructing the radiator, because the air is also going to pass through your condenser. And if you're not getting any airflow while the car is standing still, then it's going to be kind of warm. You'll also want to check to make sure that the fans that sit on the back of the radiator or the condenser are spinning whenever the car is standing still. So these fins here should actually be moving when you've turned your AC system on while the car is parked. More than likely, however, the problem is going to reside with the pressure inside the AC system, and in order to measure that, we're going to need an AC pressure gauge. Now, you can either get them single like I did. I just bought the low pressure side, which is blue. You can also buy the manifold, which is going to run you about $70, but it lets you check both ports. But the majority of problems you can check with just the low pressure side. Instead of buying a gauge like this, you can also just go to any auto parts store and you can buy a recharge kit. These recharge kits will actually have the gauge built into them, and this way you're going to be able to reload the car with freon in case it needs it. So in order to hook these up, we're going to want to locate our low side tap. We found this earlier. It should be the one with the L written on top of it. It's also typically the larger of the two hard lines, but you can verify by making sure it's the one that runs from your evap all the way down to your compressor. So we'll go ahead and hook up the gauge to that side, and if you got the manifold and you happen to have the high pressure side, which is the red as well, you can hook that up to your high pressure tap too. And then you're going to want to take a look at the gauge reading on your low pressure side, the blue hose. You should see some sort of reading here. On my Sentra it reads about 65, I checked my Civic, it's about 55 PSI. It also reads about 70 PSI on the Z. You should get some sort of reading from this. If it's reading 0, it either means you're completely out of freon, or it means that you didn't hook it up correctly. So you may want to double check how it's set, and if you're still getting a reading of 0, it means all of your freon's gone, and that means you probably have either a major leak in the system, and you're going to need to just completely refill it with freon. So that's going to be the next course of action for you. But if you're getting a pressure reading off of this, it means there's at least some freon in the system, so that's good. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to have to turn the car on, and you want to set your AC again to high, set the fan all the way on max speed, and then you should get a different pressure reading here. Now, with the car turned on and the AC running, we should be getting a lower pressure reading than when the car was turned off, and that's because we actually have freon flowing through the expansion valve, and that's causing the pressure on that particular side of the AC system to drop in pressure. Depending on the particular temperature that day, you're going to be getting a different expected value for your pressure here. This chart, by the way, will vary a lot depending on, for instance, the type of refill kit that you end up getting. These charts can vary a little bit. They usually include them on the cans. But going off of this chart, let's say that it's about 90 degrees outside. We would expect our pressure to be sitting between 40 and 45 PSI. So if we go and look at the gauge reading, and we happen to be between 40 and 45 while the car is running and the AC is going at max blast, then we know that the freon level is perfect and we're getting the expected pressure here, so you should be good to go. However, if you're within this range and your AC is still not blowing out quite cold, there could be a different issue. You want to verify that you're getting proper airflow through your vents. And if everything seems clear there, then it's quite possible that the AC system could be a bit clogged up and you're not getting the right proper amount of reflow. So there may be something clogging the AC lines, and you may end up needing to get professional help to kind of help clear this out a little bit. The most likely cause of AC problems, however, is due to this reading being too low, and that's usually because there's not enough freon in the system because it's leaked out over time. So let's say we're getting a reading of 30 instead of 40 to 45. we're going to want to take our recharge kit, which you can buy from most auto parts stores, and the directions for how to fill it up are always listed on the back here. You're just going to hook this up to your low side pressure port, and you're going to continue to hold the trigger down to fill it up with freon until it gets within the 40 to 45 range. Now you're going to want to monitor it at least every 15 seconds or so, because you don't want to overfill it, you don't want to get too much pressure into the system, and you also want to make sure that it is actually raising in pressure. There is a chance that as you begin to fill it, the pressure value isn't going to end up rising, and this could indicate an issue with your expansion valve, or there could be a major leak in the system which is preventing it from being able to rise correctly. So if you aren't able to get the pressure to go up as you're adding freon, you're going to need to check for leaks. There are leak kits that you can buy, which basically uses a color fluid that allows you to spot where the leak is a little more easily. So if you can do that, go for it. Otherwise, you may have another issue, for instance, with your expansion valve, and you may need to get this checked by a professional. However, if you're adding freon to the system, you should see your pressure begin to rise correctly, and you're just going to keep adding more and more freon until you get within the acceptable range. If, however, the reading on your low pressure port is too high, let's say 60 psi instead of 40 to 45, this is going to indicate another issue with the system, and ideally you're going to want to get another reading from your high pressure service port. So you're going to need to get the separate gauge because they are different fittings. If you already have the manifold which has both gauges on it, then great. So you'll need to take a separate reading from the high pressure side, and the high pressure side is going to have a different chart because it does run at different pressures. So let's assume that your expected reading on the high pressure side is maybe 200 psi at a particular temperature. If your reading is too low, let's say you're getting maybe 100 psi, this is a strong indicator that your compressor is beginning to fail. If you're getting a high pressure reading on the low side and a low pressure reading on your high side, it indicates that there's not a ton of flow in the system and that more than likely that compressor is going bad. But if you're getting high readings on both the low pressure and high pressure side, so let's say your high pressure reading is maybe 220 psi instead of 200, this indicates that there's just too much pressure in the system. More than likely you're going to need to drain some freon out. And for that, it's best to take it to a service station that can actually drain this properly, because you can't just vent it out into the air. That's illegal. So if you have high pressure within the system, both on the low pressure and high pressure sides, I do recommend that you end up taking it in to get serviced. And that's going to be it for this video, guys. Thank you for watching. I will be doing a follow-up video where I'm going to replace the clutch on the Sentra's AC compressor. So if you're curious to see how difficult that is and you want to follow along with my future repairs and DIYs, both on the Sentra and on my 370, you can give me a subscribe here on YouTube. Also hit that thumbs up button, and if you happen to use this video to help you with your car, you can leave a comment down below. Let me know what was wrong with your vehicle, and I'll see you all in a future video. Later.